good work that his group is doing, where there's maybe some synergy and we can partner with him on certain things instead of kind of replicating, rebuilding the wheel down here from scratch. So really appreciate Mike willing to take a chance to spend a few minutes with us and let us know about some of the great stuff they're working on up north. So with that, Mike, take it away. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm trying to readjust my mic and camera. Everything kind of went south on me earlier today, so I appreciate the opportunity to address the air quality technical committee, and I appreciate it. And I go way back with the committee, as Andy knows. I was on your committee in the 90s, so unfortunately that dates me, but also it gives me some assurance that you guys are still at it and looking at air quality matters, and hope I can assist with my organization, the Regional Air Quality Council. So would it be okay, Andy, if I shared my screen?
Give me just a moment and I will let you do that.
You're good.
Okay.
Okay, I should let you share now.
All right, let me see if I can get this right here, and I should have, I guess I have too many things open here. I better hold on one sec. Let me cancel this out. How do I stop the sharing? So let me try it one more time. I have two monitors, so looking at the monitor that's open, and darn it, I don't this is the one here, I think. Cool, so let me go up to the top here and start my presentation and see if it works right. Okay, how does that look? Is it coming through?
Looks good.
Awesome. Okay, well, again, thank you all for having me today, and Andy for inviting me to address the committee. And the Regional Air Quality Council, we've been around for 30 plus years in the Denver Metro North Front Range area. So this graphic here gives a description of the area that we cover. And so we're what's called the lead planning agency for air quality, and our turf here is the Denver Metro North Front Range Ozone non-attainment area. So the governor appoints our board, makes the designation through executive order that the RAC is the lead planning agency for air quality. And Colorado Springs, or the Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments, I believe still has that designation for your region based on the old carbon monoxide issues that are long solved for your area, but still PPACG retains that designation as it relates to carbon monoxide, but it's basically applied for any pollutant issue that you guys might have. So the governor again appoints my board. We have a board that is representative of the transportation community, the private sector, industry, citizen groups, government agencies, both state and local. And you can just see our list of responsibilities. Really, the primary requirement is to develop plans that meet the air quality standards over time, that brings the area into compliance. We're not a regulatory organization. We can't require anybody to do anything, but we do vet and consider emission control strategy options and advance those forward to the state or other decision makers for consideration. One of the big things we do is public education and awareness in our region. So if you've heard of Simple Steps, Better Air, or Ozone Action Days, a number of things we do across our region, not just in the summer months, but year round, to increase public awareness of our air quality issues and provide good information as to what they can do, what individuals and organizations can do to either control emissions, reduce emissions, or protect themselves from poor air quality. We also implement a number of public-private partnership projects to reduce emissions. So we don't just plan, we just don't talk about things, we do things that reduce emissions directly. And I'll talk about those programs here in a moment. And really very importantly, as you all do at PPACG, we represent local governments in our region. We are the body to go to for air quality planning matters at the local level. And we provide services to local governments, but we also serve as a liaison to the state and to the federal agencies related to air quality matters. So any questions about the RAC in general? Happy to just stop here, within the presentation and talk about things and answer any questions you might have. I'll ask you all to monitor the chat here. I see somebody's in the chat with a comment. I don't know if it's directed to me, but please come forward if, versus chatting a question if you have something for me. Okay, well, I'll keep moving here then. This is basically, where we have been, where we are at times, and where we would like to be. So of course, we have air quality issues here in the Denver Metro North Front Range region. The infamous brown cloud from the past, that those poor hazy visibility days, we still have those on occasion, especially in our colder months. But we have air quality issues, either local neighborhood issues or regional issues at various times throughout the year. And of course, we want to get to a point where we have clean air for everybody all the time. And that's really the ultimate goal. We have a history of air quality issues, and these are a presentation of the federal air quality standards for fine particulates and nitrogen dioxide, all the way through ozone, and the various standards for ozone as the ozone standard continues to get tightened up over time by the EPA. And it's whatever the standards are, local areas and states are required to come up with plans and approaches to meet those standards to be protective of public health. There's not a separate standard for a region based on, what's given to you, whether it's climate or meteorology or geography or location. The standard is the standard, and every area is responsible for meeting those standards. So we've had a history of non-compliance with all the health standards except for sulfur dioxide. And we've come into attainment for all standards, including ozone in the past. But in the more recent ozone standards, we are out of compliance for those. And Colorado Springs has had that history with, carbon monoxide especially, and fine particulates, at times, and is now flirting with the ozone standards. So you all have a history as well, but thankfully you're not a non-attainment area as we are classified as. So, ozone is our primary issue. These are all the different activities that contribute to summertime ozone. Basically everything people do can contribute to summertime ozone. In those hot summer days where we get a lot of sunlight, stagnant meteorology, and the emissions that we have every day, all can build up and form ozone, and we have high ozone concentrations on a regular basis in our region. So this graphic here just shows what the numbers are over time. And if you sort of eyeball things, you could say, hey, we're a little better than we used to be, but we still are not in compliance with the standards. And our more recent values in the last couple of years have been on an upward trend. Now, granted, there's wildfire influence that have been really dominant in these last few years. Wildfire can contribute to ozone. They once in a while can cause, the area to exceed ozone standards. But most of the time for us, it's wildfire is contributing to our high ozone. That's not the primary driver. So we have work to do. The two standards are listed there, the 70 parts per billion standard, which is in green, which is the health standards, and then the older standard of 75, which is still in place, and we're required to meet both standards. So this is another graphic of how things go over time for us. These are our levels. The yellow are the values that are if you chopped off the orange ones, we'd still be out of compliance with the standard of 70 parts per billion. But we really do get pushed up, and especially in this past year. This was a wicked last year for 2021 for the entire Western United States for ozone. We had just the worst meteorology we could imagine. The wildfires, of course, contributed to the emissions and to the events, but so many areas across the West on wildfire days and non-wildfire days were just subject to those stagnant hot days of July and early August that really pushed us over the standard in a big way. But in other recent years, we've done much better. We've had fewer days and fewer number of what we call ozone action day alerts, so that we're informing the public of the issue, and we're trying to give them information to either do things themselves or to take cover and protect themselves. So this is just how things have been over time. We bounce around a lot, and we just have a persistent problem with where we are with the compliance with ozone standards. So this is an image that through modeling, we do a lot of modeling to try to estimate where ozone might come from, who contributes and by how much. There is no way to look at a monitor and determine, hey, that ozone on that day, came from this. You can't do it. It's as that previous graphic illustrated, it's a combination of the emissions and the meteorology and a number of other events that give us those high days. You can't apportion from a monitor or a group of monitors what the causes were. You have to model it. So we have to develop inventories of emissions, combine that with the meteorology and the weather and the conditions that occur, and then put it in a photochemical model, big money, a lot of time, to come up with this kind of information. So we know that we get a bunch of ozone. Half of our ozone comes from outside of the continental United States. That's the boundary condition. It's values below the ozone standard. Say it's at 30, 40 parts per billion of ozone. Everybody gets that across the world. We all contribute to that ground level ozone. There's natural sources, but most of it is human driven. And so we contribute to it. China contributes to it. Everybody contributes. It just kind of circulates around the globe, what we call the global background. And then we say, okay, what can we do about it locally? Okay, it's not violating the standards, so we're pushing ourselves over the edge, over the top. So we have our Colorado human-caused emissions at about 30% of the problem. And then we have natural sources, neighbor states, international emissions that you could directly tie to, say, China or another location, and fire as well on a typical fire season. So this just is another way to illustrate it. Here's a breakdown by category of that, of the Colorado and the other regional emissions. So we see vehicles top the list. Oil and gas for us. When you add up all the oil and gas categories, that's really the biggest source. We have a big oil and gas field, a very productive field, to the north and east of the metro area. And so we have, that's part of the industrial activity in the North Front Range, along with the vehicles and along with all of the other activities, the point sources, all those commercial operations. Lawn and garden equipment is an important contributor. And so when you just look at this, and this is the result on a general high ozone day, what that breakdown might look like. So it gives us an idea of what we need to do to address emissions. It doesn't make sense to go focus on the smallest of the small. What it makes sense is to look at oil and gas and vehicles and lawn and garden and non-road sources like construction equipment and point sources, those industrial activities. But there's so many of them and nobody contributes all of it to cause the problem. You have a lot of sources contributing a little bit, and they all add up to cause our high ozone value. So this is the kind of work we have to do to figure out what to do next. So this is another look at it. Here's how we can break down the contributions, but we see that emissions are less today than they are in the past. And this has been a trend over time. So because we're handed such a high background, that we can only control anywhere from 25 to 50% of the problem. And so we can cut our emissions in half, but it's really like cutting them in, by a fourth, because we get that background that's consistently high that contributes to our ozones. But this shows us that we are making progress in reducing emissions with all the myriad of programs in place for both nitrogen oxides and volatile organic compounds, those kinds of things that contribute to high ozone. So, as I mentioned, so much has happened already. We have everything from new vehicle emission standards, the inspection and maintenance program for vehicles here in the Front Range, North Front Range region. We have gasoline and diesel fuel standards and national requirements on small engines and non-road equipment. We have industrial source permitting, the probably some of the most robust in permitting and control requirements for industrial facilities in the nation. And we need it because we're an ozone non-attainment area, and we have been for a long time, and we're ready to be downgraded to what's called the severe classification, which means even tougher requirements. And it's not that our ozone is more severe than it used to be, it's just that under the Clean Air Act, the longer you take to get into compliance, the worse classification you get. And if you're a severe or serious or extreme non-attainment area, that means you've not complied in the required amount of time, and you have to put in place the most stringent control programs to solve the problem. And so we've looked at commercial solvents, paints, coatings. We have standards in place that are statewide standards, architectural and industrial equipment and coatings and consumer products, lipsticks and deodorant and household products, and you name it, it's got a low VOC requirement. Oil and gas industry requirements. We have some of the best oil and gas industry regulations in the nation, in the world, but it's still not enough because it's still the biggest emitting category, and we have to look for what else we can do. You know, transportation planning, you all do that in Colorado Springs as well. And then our public education and outreach program is what, you know, we try to really enhance to get the word out. But again, it's hard. It's, you know, look at this goofy graphic here. It's so much information, but we have our emissions on the downward trend, and they have been year after year after year. But we get more and more people. We get more and more vehicle miles traveled. We get ozone design values. Those are those concentrations, and it's a little out of date. Need to update it with a few more bubbles here to get to modern times. But you can see we're just kind of hovering around 80 parts per billion, 78, 79. Ones that will pop up to 83. We popped up this past year to 85. So we really do, you know, we in the face of all this new growth and with the result of emission reduction benefits, we're sort of flatlined. And so how do we move that needle? How do we get those directions, you know, continuing in a downward pattern? And so, you know, we have our programs at the RAC, and we're just one piece of the activity. You know, we have the Air Pollution Control Division at the Department of Health and Environment. That's their charge and responsibility to do the big stuff, the industrial source permitting, the you know, making sure the fuels meet the specs, all of those things. But at the RAC, we can help advise that process and run programs. Our Simple Steps Better Air program, we do the education and outreach program for the non-attainment area, working with all of our partners. We have vehicle electrification efforts throughout Fuels in Charge Ahead Colorado. This is really the secret to getting at the vehicle emissions over time, is electrifying everything. That's a long-term generational process. The new cars and trucks today are gas and diesel powered. They'll be with us for 30 years. But 30 years from now, the thought is that 80–90% of our fleet will be electric, and we'll be left with some residual you know, gasoline, diesel vehicles, but who knows what will happen. You know, 30 years is a long time in this fast moving world we live in. But right now we're incentivizing the conversion of vehicles, heavy duty, light duty, medium duty vehicles to electric, and putting in charging infrastructure throughout the state, but especially here in the Front Range. That's our zone of influence. And we've spent and passed through to the public. We don't do it ourselves. We just are the place to go for the money. Millions and millions of dollars we've funded for charging infrastructure around the state, infrastructure and vehicles. Our Mow Down Pollution program, this is a really popular program, really small scale, but we hope to ramp it up as long as we, you know, if we get dollars. It's getting that lawn and garden equipment electrified. A big source, you know, the gas-powered mowers are dirty. You know it. You know they are. You mow your lawn, you smell like gas. You can smell the exhaust. That's really not the case with vehicles anymore. They're so clean. But again, with vehicles, there's so many. There's millions of vehicles in our region driving 80 million miles a day. That's the amount of traffic we have. 80 million miles of traffic here just in the Denver metro region alone. And so you tally up all those emissions, you get those inventories I talked about. Lawn and garden is the same thing. You know, just hundreds of thousands of lawnmowers. Granted, they don't go all the time, but they do if you're a commercial operator, if you're maintaining parks and recs facilities, office parks, you know, the crews running up and down the neighborhoods, mowing lawns all day. A big source, and we're trying to electrify that. And then air quality planning, developing the plans and the strategies, making recommendations of what to do next and how to get us into compliance so we can actually achieve, you know, good public health, good air quality almost all the time. You're always going to have a day or two or five that you're going to bust the standard. That's common everywhere, but we have to do our best to minimize those high ozone days as best we can. So, you know, we do our advisories through our program. We have highway signs. We have just partners throughout with CDOT, you know, Department of Transportation, and the Denver Regional Council of Governments, the private sector, all trying to push our messages out and get people to either take action or protect themselves if they're sensitive. You know, just all kinds of messages that we do. You know, stop at the click, fuel up your vehicle after 5. You know, when you fuel up your gas tank, you're contributing to the ozone emissions. The emissions that cause ozone. And so if you do that at night, you mow after 5, you fill up after 5, you're basically beating the sun. You may be emitting, but you don't have that sunlight to drive that chemistry to form high ozone. So there's a lot of things you can do without changing your life. You just have to reschedule things, consolidate trips, be more efficient in your driving, go electric if you can, and we all will as we get new vehicles down the road, because they all will be electric in the future. That's the commitment and the plans of all automakers, is to go electric in probably 10 short years. You know, just anything you can do to skip a trip. You know, we have all kinds of programs. Just Skip 2 is a popular program. You sign up and you commit to just skip 2 trips a day. That's all we're asking. It's not never drive your car again. Just reduce your driving and minimize things or drive efficiently. And so I know that was a lot here. Tried to pack a bunch in for y'all, and happy to talk about anything in detail and where we can help, you know, you all in developing your air quality program, partnering with you guys, sharing resources. You guys don't have to invent this. You know, we have great resources, and we're happy to share, and we're happy to work with you all. We know there's a lot of commuting to and from our metro area. So your vehicles coming up to our area, our vehicles coming to your area. Air doesn't respect borders. You might get some of our poor air quality up and over the Palmer Divide into your region. We may get some of yours. It's just how it works. But we need to partner. We need to help each other and work to solve this problem, because it's really difficult and it's really hard. But together, you know, that's the only way to do it. So I'm happy to take any questions y'all might have, or Andy, how would you like to proceed?
Yeah, let's do some Q&A. I've got one question to kind of kick things off, and then maybe Jessica can sort of monitor to see if folks are putting questions in the chat or have their hands up. But great information. This is awesome, Mike, and a lot of ideas where we might want to adopt kind of similar strategies down here, or just partner with you guys to kind of figure out how we can use the same kind of marketing messages and things like that. Really intrigued by your mow down pollution program. I think that's awesome, and sounds like it's on a voluntary basis, which is good. Do you have pretty good support from the commercial operators out there and the public sector folks that are taking care of like recreational spaces and stuff like that? How is that sort of ramping up?
Well, you know, I'll be honest, we don't. This is a program, and it's always been a program for the resident. So what we do is we cobble together monies through donations and our own funds to say, okay, we have $50,000. You come and recycle an old mower, and at an event, was our past practice, where we'd have 3 or 4 events a year throughout our region. And you know, you bring that old gas mower for recycling. You have to trade one in to get a new one. And then we'd give $150 off of the equipment, and then the manufacturers would show up, and people could choose what they wanted, and they get that $150 off. So we moved to a retail approach. We left the events behind, and now it's through Home Depot, can be through other retailers. Lowe's and Ace Hardware have expressed a strong interest in participating as well, to say, okay, you recycle that mower at a metals recycler, and they give you a coupon or a receipt. You come on our website, show you've done that, we give you a voucher bring that voucher to Home Depot, pick out anything you want, you get $150 off. And so that's been the approach. And so it's been these last few years, we've upped the number to about $100,000 a year. So we're able to get about 1,000 mowers off the lawns in each year, the last couple of years. Have a little overhead to pay for things, but we try to pass as much through to the community that we can. And we hope that we've heard rumblings that the legislature may put big money into this, whether through the governor or through the legislature, and make it a statewide effort, or at least in our region. We're not sure, but we'll wait and see how this legislative session goes. But what we have done also is we've gotten other monies where we've said, okay, local government. We chose the city of Evans, which is outside of Greeley, and we said, here's $40,000. Go buy what you want. Go electric any way you can. And we've done this with Fort Collins as well. And we've granted them money. And so, it's very, that we call them pilot initiatives. We want to see how it goes, because we don't have a lot of money for this. But if we can grant commercial operators, local governments, significant monies, they can just, pick and choose what they want, retire that old equipment. We don't want that in service, because usually it's dirty, old, high emitting. We want those scrapped or taken out of service. And then, going electric as much as possible. But the equipment's out there. Some of it is, cheaper than gas. Some of it is more, especially the big commercial stuff. But it's all evolving here in the next 5 years, where everything is going to be electric. And we're hoping to incentivize that even greater.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. Would love to see us either start a program down here similar to that, or glom onto your guys' program if we gave you support or something like that. But yeah, really intrigued in how we can get something like that going here.
For example, if it's just Home Depot and we have our same model, if we had extra money that said, okay, 2 Home Depot stores in Colorado Springs are selected, because we can't do it at all of them because they have kind of internal processes at Home Depot. And so we'd take a couple Home Depots and say, show up with your voucher there. We need to get a scrap yard or two, for recycling down in your region. And we'd need to get, resources to cover the cost of, how many vouchers would you do in the Springs? And let's just make it up. Say there's, 200 out of our 1,000, or we add 200 more. And so, or 500 more, whatever we get money for, we could fund, and we could just add it into ours. We're not territorial. We're happy to expand the boundary, but we just need resources.
Sure. Good. Jessica, you seeing any other questions coming in?
All I see is some questions / comments in the chat from Judith. Is there a way that we measure visual pollution, the view to the mountains?
Well, that would be different than our summertime ozone, but yes, that we have what's called an urban visibility standard here in the Denver metro area. So it's the clarity of the view from point A to point B, essentially. And it really goes back to the days we were in violation of the particulate standards here in our region. And so by reducing particulate emissions, or those chemicals that form particles, just like ozone does in the atmosphere from other pollutants, there's invisible pollutants that combine, change chemically, and become a fine particulate. And so all the programs to reduce diesel exhaust and industrial emissions have resulted in, really much improved urban visibility for us here in our region. So you have to have monitoring equipment to get a sense for what the problem is, what that visibility degradation is. And that kind of program is also in place in our national parks and wilderness areas across the nation. But here in Colorado, we have a visibility program where emission reductions are required so that we can improve the visual range of the visitor, because nobody wants to go to a national park or a wilderness area and not see the view in the distance because of air pollution. And so there's federal requirements for visibility. Those apply in those pristine areas. They don't apply in an urban area like ours or in Colorado Springs, but you can measure it. You can develop programs to improve that visibility. But really what you need to do is reduce emissions of the particles, whether it's dust from unpaved roads or dirt roads or unpaved parking lots, to industrial emissions, vehicle exhaust, buses and trucks and off-road construction equipment, all of those things contribute. And so, it's just reducing emissions, and we have federal standards for new equipment, but older equipment is dirtier, and when you don't have rapid fleet turnover to new equipment, you get those higher emissions that can degrade visibility.
Okay, thank you, Judith. Does that kind of?
I don't know how to do the chat. Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm just reading here online. These are all the counties in Colorado that require emissions testing. Okay, Boulder County, Broomfield County, Denver County, Douglas County, Jefferson County, Adams County, Arapahoe County, Larimer County. Why are we not doing that here in El Paso County? Why don't we do it before we're forced to, at kind of preventative thinking ahead? Because we're growing, we've got a problem. It seems to me that would be the #1 thing, is to get these dirty cars off the road. So why are we not pursuing that here? Why am I not hearing that in this conversation?
Okay, well, a little history. Y'all had a vehicle testing program in the 80s and early 90s, and it was
yes, and we never should have stopped it.
Yeah, it was in Fort Collins and Greeley and Longmont, Denver, the whole Front Range region, because of carbon monoxide. When you came into compliance with the carbon monoxide standard and you didn't violate any other standards, then that program wasn't necessary anymore for carbon monoxide. Vehicle technology and cleaner fuels really have solved the problem. And so our testing program is not for carbon monoxide. It's measured, but it's not, we're way below the carbon monoxide standards too, which is great news, a great success. But because the Denver Metro remained out of compliance or marginally in compliance with federal ozone standards, the program had to be maintained in the Denver area. And then when the non-attainment area that we have for Denver Metro was expanded to cover Larimer and Weld counties because of ozone, the inspection maintenance program was also expanded because of that non-compliance for ozone. Now, if Colorado Springs were to come into non-compliance with the ozone standard, you became a ozone non-attainment area, then vehicle inspection and maintenance would be necessary depending on your classification. And so the worse your problem is, or the longer it takes for you to solve that problem, then an I&M program would become mandatory under federal regulation. But in the meantime, it's not required. And so it takes the boundary of what we call the air program area that is for the inspection maintenance program, does not include El Paso County in statute. So the legislature would have to amend the current statute to include a broader area, such as the Colorado Springs, Manitou Springs, up through into Teller County area that used to be part of the testing area. So ozone is the driver, and the legislature could revise the statute to include other areas, I suppose, but it usually is not done. It's a tough program. It's a challenging program, and it has it's pluses and minuses for sure. And so it would take an act of it's not a regulation that someone could propose locally or at the state level. It would require the legislature to change the boundaries and mandate it.
But we could certainly tell them that we want it. I mean, instead of fighting it and sending in letters, making excuses, oh, there was a fire, it's not our fault. I think we should be lobbying the EPA that this is what we want. We need this to clean up our air, instead of dragging our feet and letting the wheels turn, and maybe in 5 more years it'll happen, when we've got a problem now. And we did violate the standards last year. We just have not officially been placed into non-compliance. It's all coming. We know this is coming, so why wait? Is kind of I like to be really proactive.
I appreciate the comments, Nicole. This is Andy, and like I've suggested before, feel free to bring that up with our board, the PPACG board. It's not going to be a recommendation that we make as staff, but it would be up to our board to advocate with our legislators if they that's imposed prospectively, but I don't see that going anywhere. But you could certainly bring that up with our elected officials. Want to bring it back to the RAC and programs that you guys have going, Mike. Any other questions from committee members? I've got one kind of final one that we can maybe wrap up with, but just knowing you're a Colorado Springs native, kind of knowing where we are right now, where we haven't been meeting the ozone standard the past 2 years, given a whole variety of different things going on, hot, dry summers, wildfires impacting, exacerbating, and so forth. What suggestions would you have for us as a region to try to be, if we're trying to be proactive, maybe short of bringing back vehicle emissions, what are some other strategies that we might want to consider within our region? I'll give you a moment to kind of think about that, but maybe other committee members, if they've got any other questions or comments.
Well, sure. Great question. What can you do? I think that education outreach piece is really important. You want to make sure that you're getting good information out to people that they can use. It's not that you're trying to influence the, well, you are trying to influence opinion. I'll be honest. You're saying we have an air quality issue, in the summer months on so many days a year. There needs to be, you need to know what to do. If there is wildfire smoke, these are the kinds of things you can do to protect yourself. You're not going to have any influence on stopping that, but you can at least protect yourself. You need to know what activities are appropriate and what activities aren't, as far as either outside activities or activities for action. To encourage people to think about what they do and to try to reduce their emissions any way they can with all of the simple steps that we have that aren't complicated. They're not life-changing, but if enough people do them, they really can make a difference. To get people thinking about the issue in a, based on the science, not the politics, but the science. It's a public health issue. And we also deal with climate issues, and to know that climate change is not a political issue, it's physics. And so to avoid, and to limit our contribution to climate change, whether it's to reduce emissions in a voluntary way, and if you can reduce emissions voluntarily, then you avoid the mandatory things that might come in the future. Going electric, encouraging electric vehicle adoption. There's pros and cons. There's always issues surrounding everything, but to go electric is really what you're going to see solve your vehicle emissions issues over time. It takes a while for that fleet to turn over, but it's a generational thing. Again, 2030, 2040, 2050, it'll all be electric, and we won't have the vehicle emissions issues we have today. But you need infrastructure to make sure people can charge and people can drive, and affordability can be an issue, but there's plenty of used equipment out there. A lot of people, I have used cars, and I can go electric too, so that's not a drawback. So I think the education outreach, letting know what the issues are, what the science is, and then what is the menu of options you can do locally in land use planning. I know you're going to have to do land use planning around climate going forward. Again, that's choosing projects that are more climate friendly to meet your greenhouse gas emission reduction goals in the new regulations out of Department of Transportation. So there's lots of things out there that people can do. It's just getting the word out. Mm-hmm. And we're happy to partner and help, and ready to go whenever you guys would like to talk about things in detail.
Yeah, strength in numbers, I think that could help us a lot if we partner with you guys, because you've been grappling with these issues for a long time. Judith just put a good comment in the chat. Where do we know of other best practices succeeding elsewhere? She indicates that California might have some successful programs underway, but do you guys kind of research what other communities, other regions of your size, or what they're doing and what's working, what's not working?
Sure. We have in our what we call our Ozone State Implementation Plan a review of what other areas have done and what we should maybe do as well. So we have a great resource document that I'm happy to give you a reference to, and these are just a laundry list of what other areas have done. Most of it that have really made the big difference are fundamentally regulatory. their industrial source emission reductions, consumer products standards, gasoline standards, new vehicle emission standards, and so forth. But these actions, I don't think anyone is doing more voluntarily than we are. Making sure you have options available if people aren't going to drive. A robust transit approach. Carpooling services, things like that. Ways for people to get around. The e-scooters, and bikes and things that you may not like the scooters, but man, if you can reduce a vehicle trip, good for them. And so there's just so many things, but it's just this comprehensive package of alternatives to the typical driving that we do, because driving really is the biggest source of emissions.
Yeah.
Especially in your area now, especially with the power plant, shutting down, and you're going to different sources of electricity, getting rid of that, significant point source. It wasn't your driver for summertime ozone, but it was important for other air quality issues. So I think, that transition, but when you look around, you see what's left, and it's the little things that we all do every day.
Yeah.
You got to sort of work on to tweak.
Yeah, good point, because we don't have oil and gas down here. We don't have any major manufacturing emissions and so forth. So I think you're spot on. It comes from a bunch of different sources, especially within our region. Yeah, good point.
That makes it harder. You can't pick on one or two. You got to pick on 500,000, and that's really hard.
Right.
Yeah.
Super. Well, thank you so much. Before we cut things off, any other questions?
Okay, well, thank you all very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Mike. We'll be in touch again soon, because I do want to schedule something with our board, because we're trying to lean into this as best we can.
Okay.
Yeah, I see a lot of opportunities that we can work together. So thank you. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Good. Thanks. Bye.
So that moves us along to agenda item 5, action item, draft letter to the governor regarding a request requesting exceptional exempt classification for the August 2020 wildfires. And I'll pull up that letter for everyone.
Sure. And as you're pulling up, Jessica, I'm happy to kick this off. And we're really looking for some feedback from the committee, not really wordsmithing line for line, but if you have wordsmithing changes you want to suggest as well, that's fine. But just to give you a little bit of background, as we mentioned with the previous item with Mike, we are not meeting the ozone standard given our measurements over the past 2 summers, and for a variety of reasons. It's been hot and dry. In 2020, we had 3 of the biggest wildfires in state history that have really contributed to high ozone levels that we had in that summer season. 2021 was just a white hot mess for a lot of different reasons. Really hard to pinpoint one specific factor that caused our very high emissions, but it was very hot, very dry summer. This past summer, we had wildfire smoke coming in from other states, from California, Oregon, coming down from Canada and elsewhere. So 2021 was difficult across the board, not just within our region, but across the state. And I think all Western states were kind of dealing with the same issues. In conversations that we've been having back and forth with our partners at PPACG, they did indicate that if we focus in on the big wildfire events that we had in August of 2020, those really did have kind of a disproportionate impact on our numbers within our region. And they feel, the staff members feel at PPACG, that those really would qualify as being classified as exceptional events, which means that if EPA makes a determination that none of us had any control over these, they really were exceptional and not just the new normal of new events. And if we have those removed from our measurements, from our numbers, if you will, then we would still technically be meeting the standard, the ozone standards, if those numbers from August of 2020 were taken off of our calculation. So they're willing to go to bat and make that request of EPA. It's a state request of the feds at EPA to make that process, have that process get started. They feel to get things moving, getting a letter from our region, expressing that we want to move forward with that kind of approach. That would be a good way to initiate the effort. So I briefed our board, I think it was last month or earlier this month in January, that we were going to draft up a letter and take it to the Air Quality Technical Committee and then bring it back to the board for approval in February. So that's what you have in front of you. I know we sent it out a little bit late, went out earlier this week, I believe. And I think it hits the main notes that we were trying to touch on, but yeah, I can pause there and we can maybe step back and see if there's comments that committee members have. And I know that some others, Nicole and others may want to provide some comments as well. Why don't we get some committee comments first and comments and questions, and then open it up for public comments. If anybody from the general public outside the committee wants to provide some comments, we'll take those and then circle back and then figure out where we go from here with the draft letter, if that makes sense. So comments from the committee. Everybody read it and they're good with it?
Hi, Andy. It's Victoria Chavez, El Paso County.
Hey, Victoria.
How are you?
Hey, good, thanks. How are you?
Good. I was able to jump out of another meeting and jump into this one just in time. Let me just start with thank you for doing this for our region. This is really important for our health, our economic growth, for our businesses, for our citizens. This potential of going into non-attainment could have a lot of really negative consequences for businesses, for prices, for a lot of things. And while we recognize that we want to do everything we can to keep our air quality good, we really can't help when wildfires in other areas waft into our region and then mix up with the heat and create ozone. So this is not pollution that's directly emitted by our county or by our region. It's a lot of times it's pollution coming from somewhere else and then baking in our sun here and causing this ozone exceedances in our region. So it's really important that we get these wildfire events removed from our standards so that we can comply and we don't end up with a lot of those negative consequences that come along with non-attainment. So I completely support you in writing this letter, and I thank you for doing it for our region.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Victoria. And actually, you touched on probably the most important thing that I left out. Not sure why I forgot about this, but I think it's important that, making this request, we're asking the governor to lean forward and help us out here. It's not something that's an extraordinary request. I think it's something that a lot of other states and other regions have done. But I think it should also come with, a listing of what we're committing to do to try to be more proactive. And I'd like to see the list that we have on the second page, grow over time. I'm not sure that we have more ideas that folks wanted to throw into the mix, things that we're committing to. But I see that growing. That's one of the big concerns that I've had here recently is I don't think going into non-attainment has to be our destiny. So what can we do to try to avoid that? We're talking about setting up a voluntary trip reduction program. Really kind of started with the greenhouse gas emissions rulemaking that got adopted by the state back in December, but that would have co-benefits where that would help us here on the ozone front, too. We're going after wildfire grants. Hopefully that'll help a little bit. So I think, as Mike alluded to, with small steps can make a big difference when you add them up over time. I think that really does need to be our approach. But if there's some other big ideas out there that we haven't identified, haven't captured yet, happy to weave those in to this as well. So, but I think it's important that we express to the state, hey, we're trying to do what we can here too. So, but help us out. We need a little bit of a break with the wildfire issue.
I agree. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you can finish, Victoria.
Thank you. I just want to highlight that this is not something that we're asking special favors for. This exceptional event is something that's in the EPA statute. It is within the law. And so we're just asking to follow the rules that are already out there.
Yep. Thanks, Victoria. And this is Kevin Shrewsbury with Colorado Springs Utilities, and that's actually kind of what I was going to touch on as well. We also support this letter. Thank you for the opportunity to review. And seeing this draft, it looks like all of our comments have been incorporated, and we do feel that the data it does support that these are exceptional events, and we also believe that these provisions by EPA are there for a reason, and that we fully fall under these events that we're requesting to be looked at, do fall under those legal provisions that EPA has included in the statute. So
Okay,
we
good.
also do agree, think it's great that we do highlight that we are making voluntary movement as well, including the EPA advanced program. I also think that if we are able to stay out of ozone non-attainment, that if we continue to attain the standard, that we can focus more on some of these voluntary issues up front to get ahead of the program, rather than chasing the required regulations that will come with non-attainment. So I do agree with Victoria that there's a lot of benefit to stay out of a non-attainment designation, and that'll give us the ability as a committee and PPACG to focus on some of the outreach to the community for voluntary programs.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Kevin. Any other comments from committee members? And we'll open it up to public comment. Okay, very good. Then we can circle back as well, certainly. But comments from others from the public? Nicole, Judith, others?
Yeah, you're probably sick of hearing from me, but I'll just say real quick, that letter pertains to 2020. But in 2021, we had, KKTV did a story. We had 111 days this past year of elevated ozone, and we had no large wildfires in the state. So we can't blame that on anybody else. This is us. This is our problem. So yeah, the letter's great for 2020, but it doesn't apply to 2021. And I applaud these voluntary efforts so much, but from what I'm seeing is people are just trying to live their lives. And so they're all coming home from work right when it's the absolute worst time to drive. And I don't see people really making the changes they need to. So I actually think we should go into non-attainment, because that's the only thing that's going to make anybody take this seriously, because right now nobody's taking it seriously. So that's my comment.
Okay, well, appreciate your feedback. And yeah, it was by design that we haven't asked for 2021 to be excluded as exceptional events. Like I mentioned, 2021 was just a really bad summer, and for a variety of different reasons. So it's really hard to pinpoint exactly what we would be asking for. Is it the wildfires from Oregon and California? Is it the hot, dry summer that we had? Is it other emissions that were generated regionally or throughout the state? So it really didn't technically meet the definition from CDPHE's standpoint, and their suggestion didn't really meet the definition of an exceptional event. It was horrible across the board.
Yes, business as usual. It's climate change. This is the way it is.
Yeah.
Really can't blame it on anything. This is just the way it is now, unfortunately.
That could be, but for 2020, if we can isolate it to those dates, August 21 through the 27th, those, we feel the data does support that those were exceptional and could be taken off of our record. And that does make a difference as far as us technically still attaining the standard. Okay. Any other comments out there?
Andy, this is Jarek from Bonito Springs, and I wanted to comment a little bit on 2021. I'm kind of staying close and following the data, at least for the ozone readings from Bonito Springs sensor, and I think that I very closely follow these events that originated from California on July 13th, 2021. And I made some annotations here that Dixie Fire started in California. And there were many articles and even information and news indicating from NOAA and other sources that actually the fire and smoke from California was carried from there to the neighboring states, including Colorado, even farther east. So I think we were equally impacted by forest fires in 2021 as in 2020. Obviously, 2020 had our own fires and shared those fires here statewide. whereas 2021 is more something that originated outside of the boundaries of our state. But I'm afraid that this forest fire situation is really truly deteriorating our overall ozone situation. We are already close somewhere to the max levels. The forest fires only move us overboard in terms of this compliance significantly. And if this is not addressed outside of our state, it may be a problematic thing for the near future.
Great comments, Yark. Really appreciate that. And you're right. It was a really difficult summer last year. What kind of reminds me too, I did come across, and we didn't include this within the letter yet, but contemplated maybe including something from the Western Governors Association. It's a group of about 20 to 25 governors, including ours, and basically starts at the Dakotas and goes straight south, and then all the states from that point west are part of this association. But they've adopted policy resolutions on a variety of different topics, and they adopted one around air quality protection and management. And this is very much on their radar. And I actually might figure out if there's a way we can invoke some of the language they used in their resolution in our letter, because they get to that very topic. In their resolution, they identify that uncontrollable events and conditions like wildfires, lightning, and stratospheric ozone intrusions and others, and transported ozone from international sources is something that they're really, really concerned about. And basically the crux of their concerns were that, we as individual states and as individual regions shouldn't be the ones trying to figure this out. We need help from the feds to really try to figure out, what's the strategy going forward. And it really doesn't make sense for us as individual regions to have to make exceptional events requests for these issues that are totally outside of our control. So I was glad to see that in the policy that the Western governors adopted. It was just back in November or December of last year. But they talk about how Congress should provide a mechanism to decide which factors like international transport and background ozone and wildfires that are beyond the state's control. The Fed should figure out how those are factored out of our ozone attainment determinations. So much more to come on that. And with the committee's permission, I actually might weave in a sentence or two about that in our final letter that we send off to the states. Apologies for not tracking that sooner, but just this popped back on my radar a couple of days ago, that this might be language that we want to use to the governor saying, hey, we realize that this is something that all of you governors are concerned about, and we're here ready to help out in any way we can in that regard, because that would help us too. So for what it's worth. But,
understood. So I'm definitely in support as a private interested citizen here. I just want to make one last point, that I ran some data kind of analysis back again. I removed those dates that you are requesting in the letter from the calculation, and my numbers just for the money to monitor come down as 3 years moving average, 8-hour moving average to 69.88 parts per billion. 69.88. That's slightly below 70 parts per billion non-attainment level. So yes, we are good for now, but we have to be very careful in the upcoming years.
Absolutely. Understood. Good points. Okay. Anybody else from the public? Okay. Any other comments from the committee? Generally okay with the direction of the letter? Any concerns?
Do you need a motion, Andy?
Sure, that would be helpful. Let's make it official.
So I will move that we recommend that the Board of Directors sign this letter and send it off with the annotated notes from the Western Governors Association.
It's Kevin Shrewsbury, I second.
Okay, very good. Any other comments? I guess we'll call for the question. Everybody in favor, please say aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Okay, super. Well, thank you so much. Motion passes. We will take this on to the board on February 9th Really appreciate it. This is important stuff, and it really does kind of highlight that, kind of gets into the next item that Jessica's going to chat about, but this is going to be for future stuff. But you know, we've got our work out for us this year, especially want to dive into the Ozone Advanced Action Plan and see what specific actions we can start embracing. I know a lot of that's going to involve outreach and marketing and things like that. So you know, we're going to keep the committee meeting on a regular basis. There's just a lot of stuff in front of us that we can really begin to tackle. Jessica, I'll hand it back to you.
Outstanding. So member discussion. Does anybody have anything that they'd like to share with the committee? Okay. Items for future AQTC meetings. At our next meeting, we'll have that discussion on the 2022 Ozone Advanced Action Plan. And that's the update from our initial plan where we talk about what do we see us doing in 2022. The Ozone Advanced Plan does ask for us to give them an update every year on what we did and what we will do. And one of those things is that within that action plan, a lot of the AQTC partners and members had things that they were doing on air quality projects throughout the region. So we're going to be discussing what did you do and asking for you to let us know that so that we can include that in our report back. The other one is going to be an update on the greenhouse gas emissions regulations. You've been hearing from John Leosatos in our office for a while as those have progressed and been moving forward. So we'll give you an update on where that currently is. Are there any other items you guys would like added for a future AQTC meeting? Okay, with nothing else added, our very last item is the calendar of events. The next AQTC meeting is February the 23rd at 1:00 p.m. It, like this one, is hybrid if people are interested in attending in person, but always available via Zoom. With that, does anybody have anything else they'd like to add at this point? Well then, we'll adjourn the meeting and thank you all so much for joining us, and we really appreciate your contributions.
Thank you all. See you next month.